All right, today's Daf Yomi continues to be sponsored for the month by Duvein Tehillah Catcher B'Schus Refuah Shlema for Ephraim ben Shifra, and it is also sponsored this month by the Durbach Abudi and Mandel families in honor of the engagement of Shol Harris to Meira Mandel. Mazel tov. May they build a base Neman B'Yisrael filled with Torah, Simcha, and Bracha. And the coffee in the base Medrash is sponsored by Reb Nata and Dr. Malin Glogauer in honor of all the incredible Torah learning happening in Kahal Yereim. We are learning incredible Torah on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis, 18 lines down from the top of the page, with a little bit of a story that happened. Kivrei de Rav, the grave of Rav, Havu Shakli Mine Afra Li Ishasa Bas Yoma. People were taking dirt from the grave and they were using it to cure their headaches. So I don't know whether there was like some mystical power that they thought that the grave of Rav had. Rav was known as not wasting any time in Olam Hazeh. He was known as a big tzaddik who never wasted any opportunity, never spoke any words that were wasteful or anything like this. So potentially they felt there was healing powers or remedies to the dirt from his grave. The problem is that that we are going to learn later on from Egla Arufa, from a connection to the Egla Arufa, which is the calf that's neck is broken when you find a body that dies between two cities and you don't know who the culprit is. So the leaders of the city have to take personal responsibility for the fact that somebody died, and they take a calf and they break its neck and they perform a ceremony, and that area becomes prohibited from getting any benefit. We learn also that anything that has to do with a mace, any kever, a grave, or things that are associated with a burial are also prohibited from getting any benefit from. So Asu Amru Le Shmuel, so the people came and they told Shmuel about what was happening to Rav's grave, and they felt that it was inappropriate because maybe they're getting benefit from the dirt of Rav's grave. So Amar Lahu, so he said to them, Ya'us Avdin, they're actually doing okay. It's not prohibited what they're doing, because Karka Olamhu, it's just dirt. Ultimately, it's just dirt. The Karka Olam Einan Eseris, just plain dirt that's attached to the ground doesn't become prohibited. It's not considered like the actual something that belongs to the burial, as we're going to see why that is. Dichsev, the pasuk says, "Vayashlechas afra al kever b'nei ha'am." They spread the dirt over the grave of the people of the. This is by the Asher. This is what he does. This is by Yoram. Was that Yehoram? Who was this?
In English, it's King Josiah.
Yoshia, that's who it is. King Yoshia. So Yoshia is trying to get rid of all the Avodah Zarah. So they have an Asherah. An Asherah is a type of tree that they would all worship. So they tore down the tree and he burned it up and he spread the ashes all over the ground. And so Makish Kever B'nei Ha'am La'avodas Kochavim. And so the pasuk connects and calls the sprinkling of this dirt, all of these ashes all over, to be like a grave. Ma'avodas kochavim b'mechubar lo mitzara. So just like we know that things that belong to avodah zarah are also prohibited from getting any benefit out of, but those things that belong to avodah zarah that are attached to the ground are not prohibited, as we're going to see in a moment. That if somebody worships something that is in the ground, that item doesn't become prohibited. So too, a grave, when it's attached to the ground, if it's an item that is the ground, so the grave is also not prohibited. Dichsev, asher atem yorshimosam es Eloheim, al heharim haramim, al heharim Eloheim, below heharim Eloheim. It says that you should destroy all of the gods that they have on their mountains and in their high places. And it says that the gods that are on the mountains and the high places, those are the ones that have to be destroyed. But the mountains themselves, if they worship the mountains themselves, that would not need to be destroyed. The mountains are attached to the ground. You don't have to, those things you don't say, well, okay, they worshipped a mountain, so then that's avodah zarah, you now have to destroy the mountain. So the things that are actually part of the ground are not asur b'hana for avodah zarah. So too, things that are actually part of the ground are not considered to be prohibited from getting benefit out of. So therefore, even though Rav was buried there and people were taking dirt from the kever, that wasn't prohibited. Hachanami, so too here, b'mechubar lo mitzar, if it's attached to the ground, it doesn't become prohibited. So now we're going to ask some questions on that. We're going to have some cases of Mishnayos or Braisos that seem to imply that things that are attached to the ground are in fact prohibited because they're part of a grave. Meisvei, hachotzev kever la'aviv. Let's say somebody digs a grave for his father. V'holach v'kavru b'makom acher. And then he goes and he buries his father someplace else. So now, hareza lo yikaver bo olamis, he cannot bury anything in there forever. Meaning he can't use that grave for the future. He can't bury other relatives there. That grave is now Aser B'Hanan, is prohibited for getting any benefit. So Hachabamayaskinon, what's going on here? So again, why is we presuming you can't get any benefit from it? Because once it's designated as a grave, so now it's prohibited for getting benefit. Oh, but it's just the dirt. So we said the dirt was okay. So how come it's prohibited? So the answer is, this is not the grave itself. This is Bekever Binyan. This is some kind of structure that they built over the grave. Like they built some kind of a tomb over the grave in order to be able to indicate that this is a special person or something like this. Since the stones are separated from the ground, so the stones become prohibited, and you can't get any benefit from those stones. The grave itself is not prohibited from getting any benefits. So that's going to be our distinction. Toshma kamos and kever chodosh mutter bahana. If you've got a fresh grave that was never used, so then there's no prohibition of getting any benefit from it. Hitilbo nefel, if you put even a stillborn into the grave, so now it's been considered designated for use, it's aser bahana, is prohibited from getting any benefit.
When you say stillborn, you mean a newborn?
That means a baby that is born not alive. Right? So it's not even a living person who died.
Like
a miscarriage, yeah, exactly. So now, hachanami, so here too, so we're going to say, you see the ground is prohibited from getting use. So the answer is no, hachanami bekever binyan. This is also not talking about the grave itself, it's talking about the building structure on top of the grave. Toshma kamusa, nimtza ata omer sholosh kvarosim. We see that there are 3 categories of graves. And the halacha is different in these 3 different categories. Kever hanimtza. One is a grave that somebody finds on their property. They never authorized for somebody to bury somebody on their property. They're just going through their property and they say, hey, wait a second,
maybe you don't know that you before you moved in, you had the grave there.
Potentially, before we moved in would be a little bit more problematic based on what the Gemara is going to come out. We're presuming that you knew that this was your land, that somehow the grave got there and you didn't know about it. You weren't aware that somebody buried somebody on your property.
Just take a step back. Like the Rebbe's kever. I mean, we see a lot of kevers. They have roofs. They have
they build structures around it.
Right. So
those structures
not going in if it's raining and you're literally dominating the kever.
Are you actually getting hana from the structure?
Let's say it's raining and I'm in.
Or the question is it part of the grave itself? I don't know. I've never been to these graves, so wouldn't be able to say. First of all, it would need to be literally part of the grave, meaning if you built a building next to a grave or something like that, it wouldn't be part of the grave. That would be something would be
around it.
Around it. So these sound like they're structures that are around it, and that's what makes them aser b'hana. The question is, what does hana mean? Right? Aser b'hana means that you can't go into the structure, or does aser b'hana mean that you can't then take the building materials from that structure and use them for something else? That sounds like what it means. Why it isn't prohibited to go into the structure on a rainy day, that would be a good question. Whether that's considered direct hana or indirect hana, yeah.
Right, like a holy person, you would take things and think that these things have some form of...
Right, but it's not because of the holy person that it's also hana, it's because there's a dead person, right? It doesn't have to be a holy person.
Right, no, but a buried person who's nifter, who's holy... Right.
So I don't know, it's a good question to check halachically if you can't get any hana from going under the ohel of the Rebbe during a rainy day. It's a good question. Okay, so now, that's kever nimtza. Kever hayadua. The second is if you have a known grave, right, a grave that somebody has permission and is buried on your property, and kever hamazik is harabim, or a grave that third category is a grave that damages the public, meaning it's a burial that takes place. It's in a public area, and as a result, people are walking around it and becoming tameh. So now that grave is a problem for the public. So what do you do in these 3 cases?
Like on a busy street or main or whatever.
Exactly, right? Somebody's got a busy... you see these graves in Tiveria, right? If you've been to the streets and whatever, they've got like these blue outlines for the lines for the Kohanim can't go or whatever, right? They specifically drawn in the street. So like no Kohen free zone, right? But I'm walking down the street, right? And I got to look out all over the place for all these blue lines around for all the kvarim where you can go. It's actually kind of nice that they do that. They draw the lines for you. But if there was a grave in a public area and there was no line delineating it, so then it could be a problem. So what do you do in these cases? First of all, kever and imtza, if I've got a grave that happens to be there, that was prohibited for somebody to make in my property, mutter lifanoso, so you can move that, you can exhume the body and move it someplace else, right? Somebody took it and put it in your property without permission. And pinohu, once the body is removed, exhumed, mikomo tahor, then the location where the body was becomes okay. It's pure. It's not considered to be impure.
If it was just recently buried, you could still move it, eh?
Yep. Well, I mean, like we discussed before, it couldn't be that recent if it was going to be messy, right? We're presuming that you have to be able to exhume it in a safe way, right? And mutter bahana, and it would be permissible for getting benefit from that gravesite. Now, there are two different laws here. There's the law of the location of the grave. The Rabbanan did not want people moving bodies that were already buried around lightly, right? That was not something that they wanted to encourage.
Even if it's decomposed?
Even if it's decomposed, once somebody's buried, you want to be able to leave them alone. Okay, that's the idea. So what they established was if somebody is worried, I've got a graveyard here and I want to be able to remove all the graves and that way I can, use this property for something else. They wanted to discourage that. So they made a rabbinic enactment that if there was a grave here, even if you move the body, it's still going to be impure. The area, you're not going to benefit and make the area purified by removing the body. Now that's only a rabbinic impurity. It's only a rabbinic rule. The second is the prohibition of hana, of getting benefit. The prohibition of getting hana from a grave is a Torah rule, right? But here, we're going to see that since nobody had, the person who buried the person here had no permission to use my property, they could not turn my property into something that is asur b'hana. They had no right to. They had no permission to. So I can't walk over and make your property asur b'hana, right? I don't have that right to do it. So therefore, somebody walked into his property and made his land prohibited. He can't do that.
If you sue him for that,
well, you can't. You don't even know who the person is. But the point is, it doesn't take effect. It's not effective. So therefore, there's no reason to sue because it has no impact. So therefore, that's why you can just simply move this body and there are no lasting impacts. Kever hayadua, if you've got a regular grave, so then asur lefanoso, you cannot exhume the body. That body should stay there. Pinohu, if they do. So the mekamot tameh, then the Rabbanan made an enactment to say that the location is going to be tameh, the asur b'hana, and as a result of the fact that it was established as a grave, it becomes prohibited from getting any benefit. And you see, this is where we're going to ask the question from. What do you mean? It's the grave, right? The grave is the dirt. We said the dirt you could get benefit from. Where's the problem?
If somebody bought a property,
Yep.
There were graves there, they didn't know about it.
Right, so that's why I was trying to avoid Yehuda's point is that I bought the property and I found a grave there. It could very well be
In
that
Israel,
that's,
it happens.
yeah, and you might not be allowed to move those bodies because it sounds like from this Gemara, the only reason you're allowed to move the body is because the person buried the person illegally.
Yeah, well,
if the
you
previous
had the
person,
property
right, but if the person who previously owned it had legal rights and he buried the bodies correctly, just because he sold the property to me, doesn't mean that the bodies were buried illegally. It could very well be that you can't.
Hundreds of years ago.
Right, you can't exhume that. It could be that you can't remove them. Right, that's quite possible. So I was avoiding that as Yehuda's case when he asked me that question. It was like, no, let's say they buried him afterwards, right? Because it seems like you wouldn't. It's only a problem because you didn't have permission to do it in the first place. Kever hamazik es harab, if you have a grave that damages the public thoroughfare, so mutter lefano, so then you're allowed to exhume the body for the sake of the public good. Pino, and once they have mikomo tahor, then the area, the Rabbanan did not make their rabbinic enactment under those circumstances, because they said that was a permitted circumstance to move the body. The asur b'hana, but there's still a prohibition against getting any benefit because that grave, however that occurred, was done with permission. Originally, you presume the burial was done originally with permission, and so therefore that is a grave, and therefore it's prohibited getting benefit. So now,
it says makom tahor. How can it be tahor if the body is tamei?
after they remove the body, right? After they remove the
Even
body.
after you move the body, it still can do some remnants from the body.
So you have to make sure that you dig, and when we talk about exhuming the bodies, you have to dig up a certain depth of the soil around the body as well. That's a good point. But yes, you have to dig up around the body a certain depth to be able to make sure that none of the remnants of the body got absorbed into the soil underneath. You have to do a full, thorough job. We're presuming that they did so. So hachanami bekever binyan. So therefore, we have to explain this a case again, not the grave itself. The grave itself wouldn't be a problem because it's just dirt. This is again another building that was built on top of it. Bekever hanimtza mutter lifanoso. But one second, if somebody finds a body that was buried seemingly without permission on your property, mutter lifnoso, you're saying you're allowed to exhume that body and move it. Dilma meis mitzvahu. Maybe that body was buried there because it was a meis mitzvah, meaning maybe somebody died and there was nobody to bury him and they had to just bury him wherever he was. A meis mitzvah kana mikomo. The halacha is that a mace mitzvah, wherever you can bury him, and that's considered to be legal. Everyone is required to donate their property in order to take care of this mace mitzvah.
Maybe he had no friends.
That's correct.
And everything. He had no one to bury him probably.
So therefore, how do we know? Why would you be able to move this body? Maybe it was a mace mitzvah, and he has permission to be here. So the answer is shani mace mitzvah de kol islay. Mace mitzvah is different because people would have known about it. People would be talking about the mace mitzvah that they found. You would have known that the person buried in your property is a mace mitzvah. Seems like some poor person snuck in and needed to bury their loved one and used your property without permission. Seems to be what they did. Itmar. Okay, so now it has been said. Ha'orig beged lemes. Okay, so now we've come to the conclusion that things for a grave are prohibited for use, but the grave itself is fine.
Yeah,
now,
wouldn't you know that there was a body buried there, stam? Like,
how would you know? Eventually you find out because you're doing your plowing and you're digging and you find it, right?
No, but it's like 6, it could be deep.
Could be deep,
Sure.
right.
Yeah.
So is that seen as theft of land? Not that I'm about to
Yes.
people and other people. So
It would seem, because why? Because now I have impurity on my property that
so
I may not
purity
want.
factor.
Yeah.
But how do you know the mace mitzvah wasn't done many, like, years?
Yes, you'd have to be able to know that. I presume that when you exhume the body, you could probably tell.
I guess.
Or it's a fresh
Presume.
grave.
Right, or it's a fresh
you hear
grave.
about it later.
Correct.
Where's
Right.
your wife? Well, think about it.
Itmar, ha'oreg beged lemei. Somebody is weaving a garment for somebody who dies. Okay? So Abaye Amar Osir. Abaye says the fact that you're weaving this garment, you haven't used the garment for the mace yet, but you're just weaving it for the purpose, designating it for the mace. That in itself makes it prohibited. V'Rav Amar mutter, and Rava says it's permitted. Abaye Amar Osir. Abaye says prohibited. Hazmana milsahi, just preparing and setting it aside for the purpose of whatever action you're going to take, makes it for the purposes of that action, and therefore, since you are making this garment for a body, it becomes prohibited for getting any benefit. And V'Rav Amar mutter he's about mutter. He says it's permissible because Hasmana lav milsa. He says that preparing it is not anything. You have to prepare it and use it. Preparing it by itself is not anything. My time adabai. What is Rabbi's rationale? Gamar sham megla rufa. He learns the comparison, the Gzera Shava to Egla Arufa that we said we were going to learn. Ma Egla Arufa behazmana mitzara. When it comes to Egla Arufa, you're designating this area and this animal, this area becomes the location for this Egla Arufa. It becomes prohibited. So Hainami. So also here behazmana mitzara, by designating something for the purpose of the mace of the body, so then it becomes prohibited from getting any benefit out of it. Rava gamar sham sham me avodas kochavim. Rava says I've got a different gzera shava. I'm going to learn it from sham sham from idol worship. Ma avodas kochavim basmana lo mitzara. When it comes to idol worship, just saying I'm going to use something for idol worship doesn't prohibit it and make it as though it's worship. You actually have to worship and use it.
Kochavim also means idols, because I know.
Yes, avodas kochavim means worshiping the stars, but it also means idol worship. Yeah. So so Hachanami says so Af Hachanami also here too. Basmana lo mitzra, when it comes to for the grave, just designating something is not going to prohibit it. For Rava, my time a lo gamar me Egla Arufa. Why doesn't Rava learn from the case of Egla Arufa? Amar loch, he will say to you, Memchas Amud Aleph, Mishamshin Gamrinon. So Lafuke Megarufa dehi gufa kidosha. He says that the materials that you use for the sake of the item is what we're going to. So it's the materials that we use for the sake of worshiping Avodah Zarah is similar to the materials that you use for the sake of the mace, rather than the thing which becomes prohibited by the Egla Arufa, by the calf, is the actual calf itself, right? The actual item itself that you're doing the mitzvah with. So therefore, that's not as good a comparison. V'Abaye my time a lo gamer me avodas kochavim. Why doesn't Abaye like to learn it from avodas kochavim? Amar lach midi de urche mi midi de urche gamrinan lafuke avodas kochavim de lav urcha. The answer is that doing an Egla Arufa and burying a mace are good things. Those are things you're supposed to do. So those are the things that are comparable. Avodah Zarah is the thing you don't do. So that could be why deciding that you're going to use something for Avodah Zarah, maybe, as Rashi seems to imply, maybe you predict you will do it, but you're not going to do it because that's not what you're supposed to do anyway. And so therefore preparing, it's almost like intention to do an Aveira doesn't count, right? Whereas these are mitzvos things, and that's why the intention does designate it. So that's why he learns it from there. Okay, Simon Kappa Nafshe de Chatziva Nichsa de Umna Meisve. We asked the following question. Kappa Kipa Shehu Tame Medris. You've got a shawl, right? A shawl that becomes tamei tumas medrus. So the shawl could be worn that as a head covering. Also could double as a seat cushion. So sometimes the person could take it off, fold it up, and sit on top of it. We have a rule by certain types of tuma transfer by touch. When it comes to tumas mace, touching a person who is an ava tuma touches something that's something that can become a rishon tuma, the next level of tuma. And when it comes to tumas medrus, a zav, who is a higher level of tuma, sits on something even without coming in physical contact with that item, can transfer the tuma to the item that they sit upon. That's tumas medrus. Medrus and maga are two different transfers, two different types of transference of tuma, and it depends on what type of tuma that you're talking about, how it transfers. So now, here's what happens. This person has a shawl, and they're using it as a seat cushion. So because they do that, so the tuma transfers from the person to the thing that they're sitting on through tumas medrus. But then, unasono l'sefer, he decides to change his mind, and now he's not going to use it as a shawl anymore. He decides he's going to use it to wrap a scroll with, right? Sefer Torah. So now, that item no longer becomes a garment to sit upon, and therefore it cannot contract tuma as tumas medrus, because it's not used to be sat upon anymore. However, it can contract tuma by touch, by transference of like a mace, like from a body. So this circumstance, it would be tohar min medrus. The tuma that got transferred based on it being a medrus is now gone, because the item is no longer an item that can contract that tuma. Aval tamei, but it is tamei anyway. And we take out the words maga medrus. It is tamei.
How can you usually tamei and wrap the Torah with it?
Sorry? How can you have something that's tummy that you wrap the Torah? It's actually interesting, but we consider all Torah scrolls, anything touch Torah scrolls, to be a rishon l'tuma, because we don't want to, we actually encourage and consider these scrolls to be tamei, because what people were doing is they were using the Aron Kodesh to store their truma in it, because it's a nice place, a good cabinet that you've got. And if you store your truma wheat, and they say, well, these are holy things together with the holy things, but if you store your wheat next to your scrolls, the mice come, and they eat through those scrolls and get your truma. So the Rabbanim wanted to discourage people from storing their truma in the areas with their scrolls. So they established a level of truma on the scrolls themselves so that people would not store them together with their truma. But that's a separate thing. But the point is that we're not bothered by the idea that something which is a Torah scroll or something could have truma, right? We're not okay, so the Torah scroll has the wrap on the Torah scroll can become tummy. That's not a terrible thing, right? There's nothing so terrible about that, except that you need to be aware of it so that you don't let your truma touch it or whatever. You don't wrap your kodshim in it.
I don't remember it perfectly, but even a tamei rishon, if it touches something to make a tamei sheni, does it need to be wet?
Yes.
So as long as the Torah is not wet, there's no chashash.
We have stam yadayim, our shneim l'tuma with hands. It becomes we're going to learn all of those topics of conversation. But at least when we're talking about this shawl itself, as far as it being tamei tumas medrus, it isn't, but can still have the tuma that resulted from being touched. Right. So now, the question is, Amar nisanto v'karkaso lamali. So why is it that we need to put this, to wrap the Torah with this, or wrap the scroll with this scarf in order for it to become a scarf of the Torah? Just mentally designating it, according to what we said before, mentally designating it changes its status. What was that, Rava? Was Rava's opinion? I'm going to mess it up. But shows Abai is the one mentally designated. Abai is the one who says mentally designated prohibits it. All I got to do is mentally designate it for the Sefer. I don't have to actually put it on there. Why do I have to actually put it on there? Seems to imply that Rava is correct. So the answer is no. Nisanto ukrakto kid Rav Chisda. No, I need to have both of these cases because of what Rav Chisda said. Dama Rav Chisda says, Hai sudra de azamne lemetzar beit tefillin. Let's say I've got we're going to use a bag, right? Because we use a bag for tefillin. They used to have a cloth. They would wrap their tefillin in a cloth, right? We've got a tefillin bag, but tsar beit tefillin, and you wrap your tefillin in it. So aser lemetzar bei pshiti. You're not allowed to put your money in it anymore, right? You can't just store whatever you want in your tefillin bag. Your tefillin bag is specifically for your tefillin. You cannot put other items into your tefillin bag. So that's why people will have a second bag, right? You have your tefillin bag, and then you have
You have the bigger bag to carry
the bigger bag that you carry your bag of tefillin in. That bag you can carry your tzedakah in it, right? But you can't put your tzedakah money into the bag with the tefillin itself, right? Because now it's set up. Because now,
How about the talis? Does the talis have to be stored
in a separate bag?
Right.
I don't know if they're both for mitzvah. It might not be the same. Might not be the same problem, right? Now, azamne velo tzarbe. Let's say you set it aside for the purpose of being a tefillin bag, right? You wrote tefillin on the bag or whatever, but you didn't use it yet, right? You go to the store and buy a brand new one. Tzarbe velo azamne, or you wrapped it, but you didn't, like, you just happened to grab a Sobeys bag from home and you put your tefillin in it that day because your regular tefillin bag ripped, but you didn't set it up as tefillin. So then, shari lemeitza bar pshiti, that does not designate it as for use of tefillin, right? If you did one and not the other, but not both, it doesn't.
Even if it's a temporary fix?
Why? Because it's a temporary fix. That's the point, right? Because my Sobeys bag is not designated, I'm just using it this one time, It's a temporary fix.
Right.
And my tefillin bag, even though it says it's designated for tefillin, since I haven't used it, it isn't used for tefillin yet. So therefore I can put my tzedakah money in it instead, right? I can use it for whatever I want. So therefore, those are the two things. Now, Abaye da'amar, according to Abaye, who says, Hasmana milsehi. So Abaye, this is where our question is. Abaye says that just simply designating the item for use for a Kodesh purpose makes it Kodesh. Azamne aflagav delo tzarbe, tzarbe I azamne in, I lo azamne. So Abaye is going to have to explain that what happens is like this. If he designated it for tefillin, so then even if he has not wrapped his tefillin in it yet, it's still prohibited. It still can't be used, right? But on the converse, however, he takes a Sobeys bag and he uses it one time. Just because you put your tefillin in it one time does not make it consecrated. You didn't designate it, and that's what Abaye says is the distinction, right? Sometimes I can put some if I designate it. That's sufficient. Rava says designating is not sufficient without using it. I've got to do both. Abaye says designating it is sufficient. If I use it without designating it, that's not going to be sufficient.
It's interesting. It's like on Shabbos as well, right? You designate something. Like you could take a hammer to break nuts. If you designate it to break nuts, so the hammer becomes...
We're going to use this...
It becomes kodesh. It becomes kodesh.
It becomes muktzah, right?
Right. No, it becomes not. It's not muktzah because you've designated...
Right. Well, if I use it, that's correct. And so we're going to wind up using... We can mentally change utensils for their purpose and their use, right? That's what we just did with this.
That's where I would
with
imagine
this garment.
like, his argument about having to use it wouldn't apply. It would be similar to what it is on Shabbos. I would imagine.
So now we're going to go have many examples of things that we designate, and we're going to ask the question against Abaye or against Rava whether it proves that designating by itself is going to make the item designated or not. Toshma. Nefesh shebna'o l'shem chai. Let's say he's got some kind of a structure that you build on, like we were talking about these tombs, kind of a structure that you have on a grave, and you build it for the sake of a live person, right? Person's not dead yet. Pharaoh Ramses is building his pyramid. That when he dies, that's the tomb that he's going to be placed in, right? Mutter behana. So now that item, that since it was built for a live person, it's not designated for a dead person. That is okay. That's not designated. Hosif bodimus echad l'shem mace. If you make one row of stones for the sake of the person after he dies, so then it becomes osir bahana. It becomes prohibited from getting hana out of it because now you've designated it for use of a kever. So now that sounds like it supports Abaye's view. So Hachba Mayaskina, what's going on here? Derama Bay Mace. No, this is where you actually put the body in and it got used. So Ihach, if that's true, my area Hosif, Kilo Hosif Nami lo. So he says, what? Well, then why do we have to mention that you have to add something? If you don't add something, once you put the body in it, it's for sure designated, it's used. So then it becomes prohibited for Hana. So the answer is Tzricha, I need it because Afakav Dipanye, even though you take the body back out. Right? Take the body back out once I've designated and used it so that it remains in the status of being designated. If it's just a matter if it was never designated, so that it only remains prohibited while it's being used. Once the body is taken out of it, then it's not being used and then it can go back to its original status. Right? Because then it's like we had by the tefillin, the Sobeys bag, it's just being used temporarily.
Yeah, but it was but in the case where it was actually where somebody buried a body,
then it has to be that we designated it for the body. That's why we had to add an extra line of bricks for the sake of the body. Now, the Mefarshim explain.
But when you move it, it's still been designated. It's like
No, it's not.
Why?
Because the body, the pyramid was built for a live person, or this structure was built for a live person. A body got stored there, but then the body got removed.
How about if it was the vice versa? You built a highway.
If you built it for the dead person,
no,
vice versa.
You found a body. You built a road. You built all this area, and then you find a body there.
That's for sure not going to be it, right? We had that case before, right? We had that case of you actually can move the body, right?
In Egypt, when they wrap the wrap around the body, would that be considered respectful for the body?
No, if you were Egyptian, yes. As we said about the burial, right? We want to be able to use that as a kapara. Amar Rav from Papa says Amar Chista Im Haya Makiro Choltso Umutter. If you can recognize which stones, even if you designated those stones for the mace, if you recognize which stones it is, take those stones out, and you can then use the rest of the building for something else, right? Because only those stones were the stones that were designated, right? So remove the designated stones and you're fine. Okay, Toshma. Hachotzev kever lov. If somebody digs a grave for his father, v'holech v'kover b'kever akar, and he buries his father in a different location, hareza lo yikvor bo olamis, he cannot use that grave ever. So hashem misum kavot. So the question is, why should that be? Even though this was the structure, we talked about the structure. Once he's designated, doesn't that mean that the designation makes it prohibited? No, that is different. That's not because the designation makes it prohibited. Hasam mishum kavod aviv. That is only because he's supposed to be respecting his father, right? That's why it's extra respect for his father. That also makes sense. The Ketani Sefer, the end part says, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, even somebody who digs quarry stones in order to build the tomb. Right? And then in the end he buries him someplace else. He should not bury himself there behind Olamis forever. Now, if this is all an extra chumrah, an extra stringency because of the honor of his father, we never want him to use any of these materials. So Shapir, okay, I understand. You got some stones, don't use them for the sake and honor of your father. If the issue is that it's really literally a preparation for the grave, so we understand that we couldn't use a garment that was made for the purpose of a mace. But tavi lariga mi ikalaman damar. He says, but somebody who spins the thread in order to weave, that's already a step removed, right? To do the weaving for the garment, that we said might make the garment prohibited. But to make the thread so that you can then weave the garment, that's already a step removed. That for sure wouldn't be prohibited. This is the stones in order to build the tomb, not building the tomb. So it must be an extra chumrah. So that doesn't prove anything. Tashma kamosin kever chadash mutter bahana. Somebody's got a brand new grave. It is permissible to get benefit out of it. Hittable nefel, if you put the stillborn into there, so then also becomes prohibited to get benefit. So hittel in, lo hittel lo. This indicates that designation is not sufficient. You actually have to put something in the kever in order for it to become prohibited. So no, not true. No, this is really telling us that even if you didn't put anything in the grave, it would still be prohibited. So then why does it say you have to put something in the kever in order for it to be considered asar? It's in order to contrast with the viewpoint, the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Damar. He says, he holds that when it comes to stillborn children, those are not considered mason because they were never alive to die. They don't actually make something established as a grave. But in fact, they do. And that's why we use that as an example here as something that establishes as something that's prohibited for a grave. So it doesn't prove our point. Tashma, come and listen. Moser ha-mesim le-mesim. Let's say somebody makes a collection for the sake of somebody who dies, and there's extra money collected. So what do you do with it? So it goes to it can go to other mason. Right, you have a collection for burying people who mace mitzvah collection, and you don't need it for this mace mitzvah. You can go to another. Moser ha-meis liyorshav. If you collect for this guy, right? If you've got extra, the money goes to the heirs of this person. So now, how can that be? If you collected for this mace, so then it becomes asar b'hana. Can't give it to the heirs. Right? We just said that you can't do something for the mace, becomes asar b'hana. So what we're going to explain, Shegavu mechayim, they made the collection while the guy was still alive. Right? They said, okay, there's a fellow who's dying, we need to collect for his funeral expenses. The guy was still alive. So Halo Tani Hachi, didn't we learn like this? It's none. Moser Mesim Mesim, we have a mission that says that extra money was collected for the sake of burial of bodies in general, then it goes to can go to other Mesim. Moser Hames Liyorshav, if there's extra collected for that mace, it goes to the inheritors. Vitani Allah, and we explained about that. Kate Sod. How does that work? Gavul Mesim Stam, Zel Moser HaMesim, right? If you just collected for bodies in general, people who died in general, so then that goes to a society, a burial society, right? Lemesim, so then it goes HaMesim, Moser HaMesim, Lemesim. Gavul Lemes Zeh, if you collected for this particular mace, Zel Moser HaMesim. This is Moser HaMesim. This is extra for this person, and it goes to the inheritors. But what do we see? How do we learn this? So it goes to Yershav, goes to the heirs. Now, that means that we collected for this dead person, not we collected while he was still alive. Well, one second, if that's true, ulatamech, if what you're saying is accurate, and that's your interpretation of this Mishnah, Ema Seifa, how are you going to explain the end part here? Rabbi Meir says, Lo yiga behen ad sheyavo Eliyahu, you cannot use any of the money, any of the extra money, until Eliyahu and Navi comes. Rabbi Nosson Omer Yasa Dimus al Kivro. Rabbi Nosson disagrees. He says we're supposed to make some kind of tomb or something like that on his grave, and we enhance the grave. You've got extra money for him, so let's do some kind of enhancement. Oh, ziluf lifnei mitoso, or you make some kind of enhanced. We do some enhancement for his funeral in some way. So rather, Ella Abayi mitartz l'tamei, v'Rava mitartz l'tamei. Rather, what's happening here is Abayi is going to explain it his way, and Rava is going to explain this Mishnah his way. Abayi mitartz l'tamei. Abayi is going to explain it his way, and he says, "Dekuli alma hazmanahi." Everyone agrees that the establishment of that just by designating the money for the sake of this mace, it's going to become prohibited. So Tanakama Savar dechazi le tofis de lo chazi le lo tofis. So what happens is when you are going to collect for somebody who already died, so the way that you collect is you say whatever we're going to need is for the mace, and it's understood that whatever isn't necessary, whatever is above and beyond, doesn't become for the mace, doesn't come for that, it becomes for the heirs. And therefore it doesn't become prohibited, right? That extra stuff doesn't become prohibited. For Rabbi Meir, misafkale tafis lo tafis. And Rabbi Meir is not sure whether that's true or that's not true. Therefore he says, hold on to the money, wait till Eliyahu Navi comes. Okay? Hilkach lo yigo b'hanat shiv Eliyahu. Reb Nosson pshita le divadei tafis. Reb Nosson disagrees and he says, no, for sure, it is set aside for the person who died. Therefore, you've got to be able to use this money for the extra burial expenses. You got to come up with some extra burial expenses in order to charge. For Rava mitartz l'tamei, Rava is going to explain it his way. He says that even for the sake of collecting for a dead person, that doesn't establish it as prohibited at all, right? Because that's not enough. Tanakama Savar, the first opinion says ki bazu le acholi machol ziluse gabi yorshin. He says when once they collect and they spend the money for the body after he dies, so then okay, so what happens is that they have to go make a collection for this person that died. So it's embarrassing to the mace because he didn't have enough money in order to be collecting. So we might think that, okay, so for the kavod of the mace, it's disrespectful. So who should be able to get it? So according to the Tanakama, he says, well, the mace, once he's already disrespected for the sake of being able to have money for his funeral, he wouldn't mind if it had gone to his heirs, right? That at least he'd be able to say, money got collected from my heirs, that's good. So therefore you can hand the money to his heirs. Remeir misafkali machil lo machil. And Remeir says, who says he would be mochel that he might bother him and decide that it shouldn't go to his heirs. Hilkach lo yigo bahen. Therefore, we're going to hold on to Eliyahu Navi comes. Rabbi Nosson pshita le de lo machil. So he says, no. Person would say, look, for myself, for my honor, fine. You're embarrassing in order to go collect. But once you've collected, now give me a nice funeral, right? A person wouldn't say, okay, give it to my heirs. So therefore, hilkach yasa dimos al kivro o ziluf lifnei mitaso. So therefore, you've got to enhance the funeral, not give it to the heirs. Okay, so therefore that, either way, this Mishnah doesn't prove Abaye Rava's point. You can explain it either according to either opinion. Right. Tashma, hayavi v'imo mizarkibo kelim. So a child dies, okay, and the father and mother are so upset that they are throwing all kinds of their utensils onto the body. What's the point? They don't want to keep any of these. They're so grief-stricken, they don't feel like anything in the world is valuable anymore.
Isn't that disrespectful for the body? Because you want to keep it clean, not just throw anything at the body.
I guess they're. I don't know what they're doing. Right? I don't think they're thinking logically. I don't think this is illogical, right?
With the body.
Correct. So they're just like throwing everything at the mace, and now it becomes something that's being used to honor the mace. That in the parent's mind, so therefore becomes asur b'hana. All the items that they're throwing, they become prohibited from getting any benefit. So mitzvah lacherim lahatzilon. It is a mitzvah on everybody else that's there to take the items off and to save them. They're going to want the items later, so grab the items back. Okay. So on to mem chasam base. So now hasam, they're not really designated the items for the body. That's why people are able to rescue them. It's mishum meriraihu. So it's only because they're so embittered and sad that they're doing it, and so therefore it's not really a designation for the sake of the mace. So if that's true, hainu diktani Allah, that's what we said, Amar Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, when is this? Shelo nagu b'mita, aval nagu b'mita asurin. This is when the items don't touch the bed, right? But if it touches the bed, then the items become prohibited. So Tirgama Ula, and Ula explained, b'mita hanikberes imo. So the issue is we're talking about the bed or whatever the surface was that they're burying the person on, because the mechalfi betachrichi hames, because people will see you taking these garments off of the mace and they'll think that people are able to take the shrouds, the burial shrouds, off of the mace and reuse them, and that we know is prohibited. So therefore, if it is the actual coffin, the casket that the person is being buried in, so then we don't take the garments off of the mace, because it would confuse people to think that you could do that. However, if it's the bed that the person actually died on, then you take the items off the bed, and that's fine, because there's no confusion there. Tashma, come listen. Now, let's say we've got a container that people use to put their tefillin in. Aser lahaniach bo mos. You can't put money in there. Hiniach bo tefillin. If he put tefillin in there, yaniach bo mos. So he can put tefillin in there. So ema asau v'hiniach
bo mos. He can put money in there.
Yes.
Hiniach bo tefillin.
If he made it for tefillin, so that he cannot put money in it, right? If he just happened to put tefillin in it, hiniach bo tefillin, then you could put money in it, right? Today you brought your Sobeys bag. You could still use it for your groceries or whatever. You can still put your stuff in it. Ema aso v'hiniach bo tefillin aser. That means that he had to make it for the sake of tefillin and put tefillin in order for it to be prohibited. That's like Rava, not like Abaye, who said just making it for tefillin would be prohibited. Laniach bo mos. So also laniach bo mos, then you can't put money in it. The answer is, that's Kid Rav Chisda. We've already explained that. That was like Rav Chisda, who explained that there, when it comes to the tefillin, because it's a kroy biyama, it's only temporary. And Abaye was explaining, yes, if you made it for the sake of tefillin, it would be, in fact, prohibited, even if you didn't put tefillin, and according to the Abaye explained it. So Tashma, come and listen. Amar le'uman, he says to a worker, aseli tik shel sefer, o nartik shel tefillin. I want you to make for me a cover for a sefer Torah, or I want you to make for me some kind of a covering for the tefillin. Before you use it, until you use it for a kodesh purpose, you're allowed to use it for a non-kodesh purpose. But once you use it for kodesh, you can't use it for any other purpose. So that clearly seems to be like Rava, right? It's like Rava's opinion, not like Abaye, because you can use it for anything else up until the time that you use it for the Sefer Torah, for the Tefillin. So the answer is, okay, Abaye's got to say, Tanaihi, it's a machlokas, but at best it's a machlokas. Clearly somebody holds like Rava, there's a machlokas in this point. Titania, as we learn in Brisa. Tzipan zahav o shetala alehin or shel behema. Let's say you cover your tefillin with gold, or you use a non-kosher animal for the leather of your tefillin.
The straps.
He's actually we're talking about for the bayit, but yeah, the straps too, for that matter. So psulos, that invalidates your tefillin, right? You can't do that. Or behema tahora kisheros, right? You've got to use the skin of animals that are kosher. Afa bishalo ivdon lishman, even though you haven't, the tanning of the leather was not done for the sake of tefillin. That's according to the opinion. As long as it's a kosher animal, even if that animal you happen to go to the store and buy regular leather, that you could use, right? It doesn't have to be specially made with having in mind that it's l'shem mitzvahs tefillin.
That's why we use cow leather.
Correct. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, "Af or behemoth tahora psulos ad sheyavdu lishman." He says, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, no, not true. You have to actually make the leather for the sake of the tefillin, right? So therefore, that would invalidate it. So this is the issue: whether you need to whether designating it is important or not. If designating it makes a difference, so then Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says designating it makes a difference. That's why it's very important that you need to designate for the sake of your tefillin before you use it. And the other opinion says no, designating it as by itself is not going to be anything. Ravina says to Rava, Mi ikaduchta deramu be mace vargi beged lemes. You know what? This whole question is a little bit strange. The whole question started from somebody dies, and now we're weaving a garment for him. Is the garment that you're weaving prohibited even before you use it?
Right.
Weaving a garment takes a while.
Right.
So the guy's dead already. That's the time you start weaving garments? Remember, we were trying to do burials very quickly. Why is it that nobody does that. You have burial shrouds waiting, and then when the person dies, you go buy burial shrouds already made. Nobody weaves a burial shroud for the sake of somebody that already died.
Maybe he started it, but he never finished it before he died.
It's possible. So he says, the answer is, Amar Le, that could be an answer. Amar Le, it could happen, could go Shachvi de Harpanya. The people who died in Harpanya were very poor, and they would make burial shrouds out of braiding materials together, not weaving materials, and so therefore they had quickly done, less expensive burial shrouds. So therefore, because they couldn't buy them in advance or prepare them in advance. Darsh Maremar explained like this: Hilchasa, the halacha is kavasi de Abaye. He says the halacha was like Abaye, that you have to designate it and use it. The Rabbanan Amri Hilchasa kavasi de Rava, but the Rabbanan say the halacha is like Rava, the Hilchasa kavasi de Rava, and the halacha is like Rava, that just plain designation is not going to affect anything in that. Okay, so Tana Rabbanan. Haruge Malchus. Let's say somebody gets killed by the king, right? They're morid b'malchus. They are arguing against the Jewish king. So then they get killed. Nichsehen lemelech. Their valuables belong to the king. Haruge Beis-Din. If somebody is killed by Beis-Din, nichsehen liyorshin. Their property goes to the heirs of the person. Rabbi Yehuda says af haruge malchus nichsehen liyorshin. He says no. Even if you're killed by the king, your property goes to your heirs. So Amrulei Rabbi Yehuda, but they said to Rabbi Yehuda v'alo kvar nemar. The pasuk says by Achav, who famously wanted the property of his next door person, then the person next door, and he has him. He testifies falsely about him that he is rebelling against the king. Has him killed, and then he takes over the property. So he said, "Hine bekerem novos asher yorod sham l'rishto." So he said he went into the vineyard of Navos, right? That he went into it in order to inherit it. Achav goes in to inherit it. So now Amar lehen. So therefore the king is inheriting it. Now you said that if the king kills a person, it goes to his heirs. Right. Well, why is Achav taking the property if he killed Navos? The answer is Amar Lehen. He told them Ben Achi Avihava, that it was actually his cousin. Navos, who he had killed, was his cousin, so he was actually inheriting it as he was getting it as an heir. He killed his own cousin in order to get his property.
He's still a relative.
He was a bad guy. For Roy Lior Shohaya, he was supposed to be his heir. The Halo Harbe Banim Hayulu. Yeah, but why would you go to the cousin? What, didn't Navos have any other children to be able to inherit him? Amar Lehen, Osuves Banav, he killed him and all of his children. He killed all of the heirs so that he set himself up to be the next heir. And that's how he took the land. Shenemar's pasuk siv im loes demei Navos vestemim manav ra'isi. Right, if it wasn't for the blood of Navos and his children, I saw. So the Rabbanan say no, he didn't have any children. It was the children that he would have had he not been killed. That's what he's being criticized for, and he really wasn't the heir. The reason why the king was getting it is because he was morid b'malchus. They testified against him that he was rebelling against the king, and that's why he was taking it as the king. So Bishlam I understand according to the opinion that says that the person who rebels against the king, the property goes to the king. The pasuk says Barech Novos Elohim v'melech, that Novos, the crime that they claimed that Novos committed was that he blasphemed against Hashem and the king. According to the opinion, it says it goes to the heirs. Lama li melech. Why did they have to testify? They testified that he blasphemed against Hashem, and they were going to kill him. and you're going to get it because you're an heir, why'd you have to add in that he also rebelled against the king? It's not necessary. That's an extra crime that isn't necessary to talk about. The only reason to mention and the king is so that the king would get the property. Yeah, but according to your reason, Elokim Lamali. Why do we have to include? Fine, I understand why the king rebelling against the king gets the king the property. Why do you have to make up that he also blasphemed against Hashem? Ella lafushe rischa. The answer is that the witnesses were trying to make Novo sound like a really bad guy. So therefore, they were drumming up all kinds of charges. So therefore, the fact is that doesn't prove anything. The fact that they testified that he was also blaspheming against Hashem and the king was just that they were trying to show what a terrible guy he was, and that's why they said that. So Bishlam I understand according to the opinion that says that the property goes to the king. The pasuk says Vayanas Yoav el Hashem Vayechzak bekarnos hamizbeach. That's why it says Yoav ran to the Mishkan. Right, where Yoav was told, David HaMelech, when he was dying, told his son Shlomo to take care of some unfinished business. He had to kill Yoav, who was David HaMelech's general, and Yoav ran away when he knew that Shlomo was chasing after him, and he went to go grab onto the Mizbeach in the Mishkan. So he ran there. Uksiv, the pasuk says, Vayomer lo kipo amus. He said no. So B'nai the Kohen got sent there to go get him and bring him to justice, and Yoav said no. This is where I'm dying. So fine. So I understand why he would say that. Because why? Because he knew that if Shlomo had killed him for rebelling against David, that Yoav was in trouble for rebelling against David, so then the king would get all of his property. But if Yoav was on the Mizbeach and he died there, he refused to leave and he starved and whatever, he died on the Mizbeach, then his property would go to his heirs. So that's why he was doing it. In order to be able to make sure his property would go to his heirs, he wouldn't get killed by the king. According to the opinion that says that there was no benefit because even if the king killed him, it would go to his heirs. My nafkale mina, what difference does it make? The answer is the Chayisha. Yoav was just trying to live for a little bit longer, just trying to protect himself for a little bit longer. That's why. So fine, what happens now? Let's get to this conversation that happened between Yoav and Benayahu. What Yoav did was he killed two particular people who David HaMelech was not happy about. He killed Avner, who was the general of Ishbosheth, which we talked about. And then he also killed a person named Amasa, who was the general when Avshalom, who was the general for Avshalom when Avshalom rebelled against David, who's David's son. And Amasa became his general. So then Amasa had a change of heart, went back to David, and David used him to bring an army together in order to go chase down Avshalom. And Yoav sounds like he was threatened, that he was worried about his job being taken away as David's general, and so he kills Amasa as well. So for killing of those two people, David tells Shlomo, you got to go after him. Now, David himself doesn't actually pursue Yoav until he's dying, and the reason for that is eventually there's a rebellion by one of David's other children when Shlomo Malchus, before he's about to take over, Adoniah decides that he's going to become the king instead of Shlomo, and Yoav picks Adoniah's side. So that's where Shlomo says, okay, now I got to go after all these enemies, and he goes after and kills Yoav. So this is this issue that Yoav goes and runs away to the Mishkan in order to protect himself from Benayahu, who has been sent by Shlomo to kill him. So now Benayahu comes back to the king, to Shlomo, and he says, Lomar Kodiber Yoav, this is what Yoav told me, V'kohanani, and this is what I answered. Sounds like they're having a conversation of some kind, not like the way we said it. It was very simple. Yoav went, he said, I'm not coming. So what's the conversation that occurred? So Amar Le, he said to him, Zil Imale Tarti Lo Tavid Bahai Gavra. So he says, this was the conversation. Yoav says, you can't kill me. It's not fair. You can't do two punishments to one person. When I killed Avner, David HaMelech cursed me. And he gave me a big curse. And so he says, look, if you want to kill me, then you've got to take the curse. Right? You can't have me be cursed and be killed for the same crime. Right? Ikat l'slei kabul l'tusei dilatayavuch. If you kill me, then take the curse that your father cursed me. Ve'ilo, and if you're not going to take the curse, shavke dilei kabul l'tusei dilatayavuch. Then fine, I'll keep the curse, but you can't kill me. Okay?
I forgot. You can't get two punishments for the same.
Yeah, kamle b'derabba mine. Right? Kamle b'derabba.
Yeah, kamle b'derabba. We spoke about that. We spoke
Killing him
about
would
that
take away the curse.
Right, so killing will take away the curse.
Right. So maybe that's a...
Vayomer lo HaMelech, so Shlomo says back, Asay kasher diber, he says, yeah, do what he says. Upagabo v'kavarto. So they grabbed him and they killed him and they buried him. So that means that Shlomo agreed to take the curse. Some Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yehuda said, Rav Kol Kol Shekil El David as Yoav Niskaimu Bezaro Shel David. All of the curses that David gave to Yoav ended up happening to his own offspring, to his own children, to Shlomo's children, descendants. Ayikaris me base Yoav Zavu Mitzorah. There should not stop for this is the pasuk of the curses. That from Yoav's house there shouldn't be a stoppage of somebody who's a zav or somebody who has tsaras, leprosy. Machzik befelach, somebody who holds onto a cane. V'nofa becherev, who falls by the sword. V'chaser lechem, and be without bread. Zav. No, who's a zav? Who was the person who was a zav? Who had this disease of being a zav? That's Rechavam. Dechsiv v'hamelch Rechavam. He's amitz la'alos b'merkava la'nus l'Yerushalayim. That the king Rechavam. So he was angry at the Jewish people. They were refusing to follow him. So he decided, you know what? I'm going to show them who's boss. I'm going to raise taxes. And he went to go raise taxes, and the Jewish people rebelled against him, and they killed the tax collector and chased him out. And they wound up dividing the kingdom and had a rebellion. He strengthened himself to go up onto his chariot to run back to Yerushalayim. Ksiv, the pasuk says, "V'chol merkav asher yirkav alav hazav yitma." And the word merkav is a hint to the concept of a zav, as we said, that a zav has impurity to him, and anything that he sits on becomes impure. So the word chariot, merkav, and merkav is the same word, so therefore we see that Rechavam was a zav. Mitzora, who was the one who had tsaras? Me Uzio, this was Uzio. Dechsev, the pasuk says, "B'cheskaso gava libo ad lahashkis vayimal b'Hashem elokov vayavo el heichal Hashem laktir al mizbeach haktoras." That when Uzio was doing very well, right? He was becoming very haughty. So he decided what he wanted to do was he wanted to be the one who brought the Ketores. So he walked into the base of Mikdash in order to do the Ketores on the Mizbeach. Uksiv, and then the pasuk says, "V'tzaras zarcha b'mitzcho," and as a punishment, tzaras broke out on his forehead. Right? Hashem punished him for taking that liberty that he wasn't allowed. Machzik b'felach, he was holding on to a cane. Me also, this is Asa. These are all the descendants of Malchus Beis David. Ichsiv rak le'esik no, when during the time of his age, chala es raglav, his legs became ill and infirm. V'amarav Yehuda amarav Rav Yusei Rav she'achzu podagra, that he got the disease called podagra. And I think that Rashi says it's podagras in our language now. And we have that. Pod means a disease of the feet, right? Oh. So podagra. Amrli Marzutra, brother of Nachman, the Rav Nachman. So Marzutra, the son of Rav Nachman, said to Rav Nachman, Hechidami, what is that like? What is this disease? So Amrle, Kemachat bebasar achai, it feels like needles going into raw flesh. Right? It's gout, basically, right? I think that's what we're talking about. It's like gout. How did he know what it was like? Maybe he had it. That's how he knew when he was telling his son, was telling his son, this is what it's like. If or else, may Rabbi Hava Gomir, that he learned it from his Rebbe, right? So we're trying to ask the question, how do rabbis get scientific knowledge? So either he had it himself, he learned it from his Rebbe, or else, Soda Shemli Reyav, Ubriso Lohodiem, that Hashem has secrets get revealed to those who believe in it. This is part of the secret knowledge of Torah, or all of this information gets revealed to those that are the righteous. Nofel becherev, ones who die by the sword, that's Yoshio. Dechsev vayoru lemelech Yoshio, when Yoshio fought the battle to prevent the armies of the Egyptians from going through his land, so they shot arrows at Yoshio, and he got pierced. His whole body got pierced like a sieve. They made his whole body like a sieve. V'chaser lechem, somebody who didn't have enough bread. That's Yechanya. This is Yechanya, that he was captured eventually by the exile by Nebuchadnezzar. Tichsiv v'aruchas tamid nosnolo. That when he was captured, Nebuchadnezzar used to give him his daily meal. Basically, he had no food, and being a captive, and Nebuchadnezzar had to hand. So he had no bread. He was ultimately very poor, and he had nothing until the Nebuchadnezzar would give him. This is what people say. Mem tesamad aleph tehei luta v'lo tehei lata. You should be of the cursed. You should not be those that curse others, because those that curse others, eventually those curses will ricochet and come back to you. I guess this is a good place to stop here. Okay.